We are here to talk about the Social Genome Project, which is a collaboration between the Urban Institute, the Brookings Institution, and Child Trends. The Social Genome Model is a life cycle model of human development that begins before birth and extends on into adulthood. It's grounded in research on healthy child development. It's structured around crucial developmental stages, and it's built with publicly available data. The
green button, I think.
There we go. So we developed the social genome model to be a tool for policymakers and practitioners to think through the potential long-term benefits of early life course interventions in a structured and systematic way. So there's a lot of evidence from RCTs and high-quality studies of programs that work to, say, improve parent-child interactions in toddlerhood, to improve reading scores in kindergarten or math scores in third grade. But what we don't know necessarily is how those interventions pay off later in life. Do they increase high school graduation? Do they increase college graduation? What do they mean for income in adulthood? And we don't want to wait 25 years to do a long-term study because we have to make those decisions now. And so what the social genome model is a tool to help think through, if we have this short-term success, what is the possible long-term payoffs? It is a supplement or a complement to that type of research. So basically the purpose of the model is to see how we could impact social mobility for children from less advantaged backgrounds. Can we improve their social mobility, their chances of adult success? How can we compare different strategies in a consistent framework? It also lets us look at what the impact of doing multiple interventions at different life stages can have on social mobility. The underlying data can be used to look through life course trajectories, how kids from different backgrounds ultimately achieve success or become derailed. And our goal is to have this be a tool that can help set an agenda for future research as well as for policy decisions, program decisions, and action today. A little bit about the nuts and bolts of the model. We have almost completed building a new version of the model that's structured around 9 life stages. We begin with your circumstances at birth, move through early childhood, on to preschool, early elementary school, into adolescence, and then all the way into adulthood. And at each life stage, we look at key child outcomes in academic cognitive domain, social domain, their emotional well-being, their health, and their relationships with their parents and peers. The idea behind the model is every aspect of a child's early life potentially affects their outcomes at every subsequent stage. So your reading scores, your relationship quality with your parents at age 5 can affect your outcomes in adolescence, can affect your outcomes in adulthood. In addition to this long linked set of outcomes through the life course, we know that context matters. And so at each life stage, we also account for the type of neighborhoods kids live in, their family circumstances, their school circumstances. So all these factors can affect a child's life course trajectory. Essentially, it's a series of linked regression models, ultimately ending in outcomes in adulthood. Now, it's a fair question to ask, where do you get this data, this rich set of data to look at all these different aspects of kids' lives all the way from birth up into adulthood? Well, no perfect data set exists, but there are a lot of high-quality longitudinal studies of different chunks of a kid's life course. And what we've done is use statistical techniques to create a synthetic cohort, a set of children who look like real kids based on linking these data together. So from 0 to 5, we use data from the Early Childhood Longitudinal Survey birth cohort. From age 5 into adolescence, we use data from the Early Childhood Longitudinal Study kindergarten cohort. And then from adolescence into adulthood, we use data from the National Longitudinal Survey of Youth, 97. And so by matching these kids together, we generate a series of life courses for what turns out to be at 100,000 children that look like kids born in 2000 based on our weighting scheme. Then we went through and validated the relationships we see across these data seams to look to see if the patterns on other longitudinal data that cross those periods, say from age 5 to high school, whether our synthetic data look like it. And in fact, they do. We structured it to make those matches. So essentially, we have a rich and diverse sample of kids with data from 0 to 100,000. Those characteristics, because it's such a large sample and it represents Latinos, African Americans, whites, and others, we can reweight those data to make the underlying file look not just like the US, but also like smaller geographies, say Texas or maybe New York City. So it is potentially a really powerful tool to think through how changes early in the life course can affect later outcomes. Lots of tech there. Let me give you an example. So a few years ago, we used an older version of the model in an academic exercise for the Journal on Social Insurance. And essentially, what we wanted to do was, we know that kids who are born in lower income families, on average, have poorer adult outcomes than kids from higher income families. And so we wanted to know how much of that adult achievement gap we could close if we intervened early and often in children's lives. And we wanted to pick interventions that had a strong research base for it. So in early childhood, we looked at the Home Instruction for Parents of Preschool Youngsters program, HIPPY, it's a great acronym, and high quality preschool. These research suggests that these have impacts on reading and behavior and math scores. They're fairly large effects. Saturated it further. In middle childhood, we applied social emotional learning and success for all. Again, improvements in the cognitive domain, reading and math, and in behavior. And then in adolescence, we used the talent development program that also had cognitive effects. So, setting the baseline, what's the difference in adult success rates for kids who are born into low-income families compared to kids born into higher-income families? Here, success simply is largely measured by income. So is your income above 250% of the poverty line at age 24 and above 300% of the poverty line at age 40? So you can see there's a pretty big achievement gap of over 20 percentage points between kids who are born in low-income families to kids born into higher-income families. If we do this saturation intervention, throw these 5 programs at kids from lower-income families, we can eliminate almost 75% of the gap in achievement. And we can quantify those effects or monetize those effects, because we know what the cost of intervention is per child based on what it costs to implement the program. And we can look at how much the model indicates lifetime income would increase based on these improvements in math, reading, and behavior, how that translates into education and ultimately income. This is a very large effect. The return is about 10 to 1. Now, I wouldn't bet my firstborn child, or even my second-born child, although there are days, that this is precisely the right number. But even if it's 50% too large, even if it's 3 times too large, this is still an indication that these interventions can close a good chunk of that adult achievement gap, that these interventions could have a payoff. And so if you're a practitioner, you're a policymaker, we think this would lead you, or potentially lead you, to decide maybe this is a good investment. We should try it. We don't have to wait 25 years to decide. And then let's track what happens as a result. So now I'd like to turn the talk over to my colleague, Donnie Charleston, who'll speak about how we have partnered with philanthropies and others to use the social genome model to help them think through their approaches and programmatic decisions. Donnie.
Thank you, Greg. So yeah, Greg kind of gave you the nuts and bolts, the engine, so to speak, of how the social genome model works. So my role here today is to kind of walk you through some examples of how we've used it so you can see how the social genome model connects with the work of nonprofit organizations, like some of the ones I'll talk to you about today, as well as how that work interfaces with nonprofits who are doing the work on the ground, actually implementing the interventions that we're kind of working through and that kind of undergird the actual social genome model. Now, how many of you heard the Bridgespan group? So they're a global nonprofit, and their work primarily focuses on how they can help nonprofits across the globe really figure out how to scale impact for the work that they do. And so they came to us with a question. And so the question they came to us with was, how could philanthropy make the biggest improvement on social mobility with a $1 billion gift? And so we helped them work through that question, and we worked with a group of folks from around the country, all brilliant minds, to kind of look at what are the interventions, specifically the underutilized interventions, that could really be leveraged to have an impact on mobility. And so we came up with 6 bets, and they span from everything from childhood development to dealing with issues around the criminal justice system, to issues around continuous learning improvement, and with respect to social service delivery agencies. And so those are the bets that we analyze. And I'm going to focus on just 2 of them because we don't have time to kind of go through all the insights there. But if you want to research it, you can Google Bridgespan $1 billion, and the report comes up in one of your first Google searches. And so I want to talk to you about one of the interventions we kind of analyzed and modeled using the social genome model, and that was delaying mistimed births to the desired age that the mother would rather have had those children. And so we know that unplanned pregnancies can severely hamper the life course and trajectory of not only a mother but a child as well. And what we found out is that if you delay childbirth by 2.8 years, what you find is an average improvement in the lifetime family income of $52,000 and $52,261. Now, I don't know about you, but I could certainly use an additional $52,000 in my pocket. And so that's real impact that we're able to model just by delaying childbirth by 2.8 years. The second intervention I'll kind of walk you through is certification program completion. Now, we know that 18 to 24-year-olds who don't have a college degree or don't pursue a college degree, their lifetime chances are significantly hampered compared to young people who do accrue a college degree. Now, we're able to model the 18 to 24-year-old group, what would happen if those individuals actually did have some type of certification. We're talking about certification, 2-year certification, welding certificate or otherwise. And what we found is that when you have those certificates in place, those young people can achieve incomes comparable to what kids who actually have a 4-year degree. And so we're able to model that, making some tweaks to the model, and find that the impact is you can raise family income on those individuals by almost $14,000. That's real impact. Now, the whole idea with the Bridgespan, as I mentioned, was really around figuring out how to scale impact. What are the best bets? And whether you're talking about mothers delaying childbirth, or you're talking about certificate completion, one of the underlying issues for both of those is really around education. It's really around career pathways. Because the way the model works, when you're talking about mistimed births, what they're able to model is that if you delay childbirth by 2.8 years, what that means to that mother is, in that 2.8-year time span, she's able to accrue more education, she's more likely to be married, and a whole lot of associated factors, which we can include in the model, which has these ripple effects throughout her life, which creates that impact. And so the Bridgespan group, if you read that report, you find that one of the best bets that they're trying to make, that they're really pushing nonprofits around the country to really invest their time and energy in, is really around career pathways and education. How many of you remember President Obama's initiative focused on young men of color? My Brother's Keeper initiative. And so that initiative inspired a lot of nonprofits around the country to come together to figure out how they could help out that cause. And so we partnered with that group to help them figure out, in the same way that we worked with the Bridgespan group, what are the initiatives, what are the best bets that we can make to improve the lives of boys and young men of color here in the United States. Once again, you see those 6 interventions. They cover everything from social-emotional health to reducing stress to stopping school expulsion, and so on and so forth. Now, the beauty of the Urban Institute, how many of you have ever heard of the Urban Institute? Well, a fair number of you, great. We're glad we have some fans in the audience. For those of you who haven't, we're a 50-year-old organization founded by President Johnson many years ago to be the RAND Corporation for Social Policy. And so we have researchers that cover every one of those initiatives listed on that slide, and many, many more. Everything from tax policy and the earned income tax credit to criminal justice, juvenile justice, so on and so forth. So we're uniquely suited to do this work and partner with organizations to really figure out how they can make the best bets in terms of making change in the lives of the populations that they're concerned with. And so I'm going to walk through a couple of examples. I'm not going to go in depth in the interest of time. So we looked at the projected impacts of increasing the chance of high school graduation amongst black men who could directly benefit from those specific interventions. We see that you see that their impacts, primarily the biggest impacts, are in decreasing the number of low birth weight black boys, as well as you see differing impacts depending upon what the intervention was. And I'm going to come back to this slide in a second. And you see, but if we look at increasing the chance of college graduation, you see, once again, differential impacts depending upon which one of the levers you pull. And the best bet is, of course, average reading scores. Raising average reading scores for young black males at 6 and 11 has the biggest impact from standpoint of increasing the chance of college graduation for that population. Now, now let's put that in context. Now that number, 9.1%, increasing it by 3.7 percentage points, doesn't seem like a huge number. But I want you to think about the number of black boys who are reading below grade level. If you look at the 4th grade, for example, only 14% of young black boys are reading at grade level. 14% reading at grade level in the United States. You look at white males in that same age group, 42% of them are reading at grade level, 14 compared to 42. Now think about the number of black males that are in college. About 1.2 million black men are in college today. And imagine what that $1.2 million figure $2 million number could be if we were able to decrease that gap at the 4th grade level. And so that's the scale of impact we're talking about here, is how we can have impact early in life that can have pay off huge dividends later in life for those same populations. Now, some other takeaways from these slides is that, as I mentioned earlier, different interventions have different impacts. So the whole idea is what are the best bets? Where can we get the most bang for our buck, given the reality that we're dealing with limited resources in whatever intervention organization or community you're talking about? How can we have the best impact and really scale that given limited resources? And so that's what the model is really uniquely designed to do, is help organizations, help communities walk through that math and figure out what the best bets are for what they want to achieve. Now, this slide is a little busy, but it's designed to really make that connection between the work that we do with those nonprofits. So on the right side of the slide, I guess the left side of the slide for you guys, the social genome model funnels evidence and research into the deliberations of nonprofits, of even governments, to help them figure out what they're going to do. What are their best bets? What are the interventions they're going to fund? And what they can then do with that is they can do a landscape analysis in their communities. Similar to the landscape analysis we just conducted on Long Island, New York, with the Long Island Community Foundation that just wrapped up, actually is wrapping up this week, where we're able to kind of look at the landscape of nonprofits in that community and say, okay, who do you have in this community that can really do the work that you were trying to engage in, and what is their capacity? And so it helps them kind of, once they know the interventions, they can do that landscape analysis, identify where their holes are, where their gaps are, where they need to shore up resources, and then funnel resources to those organizations that can really do the work of bringing about those interventions and realizing the outcomes that they want to have and the impact they want to see in the lives of those children. So this is like I said, this model is really about early childhood on this graph. And what you see is that We're talking about work supports to mothers. We're talking about nurse-family partnerships. We're talking about public health. We're talking about K-12 and how all those organizations can ideally work together. Because as Greg was mentioning, the reality is that all of those entities, ideally, you're talking about stacking these interventions ideally, because there's no one silver bullet to making change, particularly in the lives of poor, people who live in poverty, minority children, and so forth. It takes multiple interventions over the life course, and they need to be sustained. And so ideally, those organizations are working together, that they are creating a culture of evidence, that data is an important feature of this, because as Greg was mentioning, the work of the social genome model is really undergirded by best practice models, evidence that we know of what works, or at least we have some tentative ideas of what works, and we build that into the model based on that research. Now, the reality is that if we're not implementing those programs with fidelity to how those models are supposed to be implemented, that means you're just throwing good money after bad. And so part of the work of a nonprofit or government entity working with those nonprofit or agencies that are implementing the programs is to ensure that they are implementing those programs with fidelity, to ensure that the processes and protocols are in place, to ensure that we're collecting the data, to ensure that they are partnering together such that what's going on in the pre-K system is supporting the work that's going on in the K-12 system, such that the nurse-family partnership program is supporting the work that's going on in public health, and so on and so forth. And ideally, we're creating this virtuous cycle wherein all of that data we're collecting from those organizations is feeding back into the work of those nonprofits and the government, so they can then decide what to do with that next bit of money. Now, I won't go to those last two slides in the interest of time, but just kind of leave you with one thought. That social genome model, we kind of give you this idea that it's like a time machine that we can predict the future with. It's not necessarily that, but it is a tool that we can utilize the best resources we have available at our disposal today to really figure out what interventions we can leverage today to have an impact on the lives of children tomorrow. And that's why we wake up every day and do the work that we do. Thank you.
And now to present Gregory and Donnie with audience questions, welcome back Robin Hood's Vion Ball.
Hi again, everyone. Talk show host, didn't know that came with the job description. So lots of questions again for you both. Thank you for your presentation. Many of the questions have to do with the mechanics of the model. Mm-hmm. So can you talk a little bit about how you're measuring lifetime outcomes in the absence of longitudinal data? Mm-hmm. And a corollary to that, causation correlation, using the example of delaying childbirth by 2.8 years, leading to $52,000 in increased income. Is that causal based on how the model operates?
Thank you. Those are excellent questions. So no, the model is correlational. We can't speak to causation. There are a lot of factors that potentially are associated with people's lives that are unobservable. So we could be overestimating some of these relationships or underestimating some of the relationships. One of the things that's really cool about the model is the richness of what we observe and what we include in the model. So it's not just linking academics to academics, but we control for physical health, emotional health. We control for a deep set of background characteristics. So we can't say that this is causal, but it is a strong correlational relationship, and it is and it's taking into account many other factors that could be. We're taking into account as many observable factors as we can. Again, this is why we talk about the model as a tool, a structured way of thinking about the outcomes, and it's also why when we look at the final result, we like to think, well, what if it were smaller? Would it still be good enough? How we look at long-term outcomes, we have built a longitudinal file. We do have life course trajectories, and so the observations in adulthood in the new version of the model are based on data on actual 30-year-olds who actually were 24 and 16 during the course of the model. And those data do include information on their income, their behavior, their physical health, their mental health, and their relationships. And so that is in the model.
Thank you so much. So the red light is flashing, which means that we're probably breaking for coffee soon. Just to give you a sense of what some of the other questions are, you can find Gregory and Donnie hopefully later today lots of questions about how race and gender are embedded in the model, how interactions with the criminal justice system are embedded in the model, and then also questions that have to do with implementing programs with fidelity, as you said, Donnie. At that kind of scale, what kinds of supports do nonprofits really need? What does your research suggest needs to be built into large public funding streams to make the kinds of impacts that the model is predicting?
Can I have 10 seconds?
Please.
Because I can answer some quickly. Race and gender are built into the model by having the relationships we look at estimated separately by race, ethnicity, and gender. So the correlations we see for African American men of color are not bound to be the same as we see for white women, white girls. The model is separate by for whites, Latinos, and African Americans. And then criminal justice, we do have whether you were arrested or convicted as outcomes in the model.
Great. Plenty more to discuss. Thank you all so much. Thank you both.